As the Palestinians commemorated the 60th anniversary of their Nakba, the catastrophe, over the last several days, Western leaders were heaping adulation on the peace-loving, prosperous democracy Israel by praising its achievements as a small, embattled nation confronted with radicals and fundamentalists bent on its destruction. They said nothing about how Zionist forces took over 3/4 of Palestine, evicted 3/4 of its population, and denied them the right to return to their homeland. And nothing about how, in the name of security and in order to make it impossible for the Palestinians to go back, Israel destroyed more than 400 villages and towns and erected some 600 new settlements for the newly imported Jews. But hey, that's history, right? Wrong. Now as then, nothing is done about Israel's ongoing illegal settlements of Arab lands, its internationally condemned war crimes, and certainly nothing about its continued denial of the human and national rights of stateless Palestinians who continue to linger in refugee camps or under occupation. So as the catastrophe continues, we ask, why should such brutal history be repeated in the Holy Land while the world stands idly by? Joining me in the studio to discuss the continuing catastrophe in Palestine is Professor Karma Nabulsi, Fellow Political Science at Oxford University, and Professor of Islamic Philosophy Tariq Ramadan, and from Beirut, Rami Khouri, Editor-at-Large for the Daily Star, and from Tel Aviv, the Diplomatic Affairs Editor for Haaretz newspaper, Akiva Eldar. Akiva, I would like to start with you, please. You've written recently a book by the name of The Lord of the Land. You've discussed the Israeli settlement in the occupied territories. And it is said, Akiva, that history repeats itself twice, the first time as a tragedy and the second as a comedy. And frankly, if anyone could justify what happened in 1948, how could it be justified today that Israel is settling its Jewish population in places like Hebron or around Nablus or Jenin and the rest of the West Bank?
I think Israel is the only place where the establishment, both the political, the military, and even the legal establishment, is nurturing, is supporting fundamentalists. And for 40 years, all Israeli governments, Labour, Likud, unity governments, have been doing the same. On one hand, they made some promises to the international community, to our neighbors, to Jordan, to Egypt, that we are going to put an end to this, because there is a paradox between the two-state solution and putting more settlements, of course.
Just on that note, Rami, in Beirut, you're there where there's some 400,000 refugees lingering in different various refugee camps. Just as Israel has been settling in the West Bank, it has been denying those refugees from 1948 the right of return to their homes, whether it's in the Galilee or other parts of Palestine. Could we see a future between Israel and the Palestinians without dealing with this question of the refugees?
No, you have to deal with the question of the refugees, and it's not just a question of Israel addressing their rights in terms of return or compensation or options that they may have. There's an even deeper problem. Israel will not even acknowledge what happened in 1947-48 and its role in that process. The simple fact of acknowledging what pre-state Zionist militant terror and guerrilla groups did in the name of creating a Jewish state, the Israelis won't acknowledge it. They add insult to injury by the government says, well, in a war, these things happen and people get hurt, and what can we do? And we'll give you some money, or the Arabs will give you money. And it's a much, much deeper problem. And I would also say that I don't even think we should start at 48, because the real problem predates 48. The problem goes back to 1896 with the birth of modern political Zionism well before the Holocaust. The Holocaust made things much, much worse for the Jewish people, of course, and speeded up the colonization and the movement by Zionist groups to take over as much land as they could in Palestine, and sympathy, of course, for the Jews around the world. But the process of Zionist colonization started in the late 1890s. So we really need to understand this as a struggle between Zionism and Arabism that has gone through many different phases and is in a new phase today.
Professor Ramadan, where have the Arabs been over the last 6 years? Needless to say, a lot of Arabs did die in different wars with Israel for the cause of Palestine. But how come the Arab world, some 200 and some million Arabs, and of course a billion Muslims or so, and still Palestine bleeds and the Palestinians remain in exile?
I think what is really important, what we are hearing now, it's history and these very important facts, because we know from where it's coming, we know what was the Zionist movement. What is really important for us is really to understand that, as it is said today in the Arab world, this is the cause of all our problems. In fact, what I'm saying is the consequence of what is happening now in the Arab world and within the Arab countries, where it's completely chaotic. And I really think that we have words of support towards Palestinians, but not really policies coming from the countries. So I really think that the first to be blamed is not, of course, if the West and everything which has been done and what we heard right now, but, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and all. Of course, many went to support Palestinians, but the policies and a vision for Palestine and for its future was not there. Many were more interested in talking with Washington, with London, than to support the Palestinians.
It's true, Professor Nabulsi Karma. In fact, it turned out that Palestine and the Palestinians were a nucleus for some movement of sort in the Arab world, that the Arab masses have in fact been inspired by Palestinian struggle for liberation, haven't they?
I mean, I think that's the importance, even with the term, the Nakba, the catastrophe, which means the catastrophe, which is what happened in 48, with the total destruction of Palestinian society and the expulsion of the Palestinian people. What happened to the Palestinians is actually something that happened to the Arab people. And the response to the catastrophe is what should concern all Arabs. And that is really the beginning of the Arab national movement.
Akiva, the Palestinians view their Nakba as Jews view other injustices done to them. So how come Israel does not wake up to the injustice being done against the Palestinians today?
Well, the way the average Israeli, if I may say so, would look at this discussion is he would say, the UN has recognized the state of Israel as a Jewish state back in 47, and the Arab world has refused to accept this and started a war against Israel. Israel has survived this war, and then it survived the 67 war, and Israel is fighting for its survival. That's the way that the majority of the Israelis, this is the narrative that they know. And what they're saying, at least 50% of the Israelis, yes, we are willing to come to terms now with the Palestinians and go back according to the PLO charter that is suggesting now a two-state solution along the lines of the 67. I think that it is a mistake on both sides to just focus on the different narratives. Yes, I agree with Rami that I wish that the Israelis will acknowledge, at least acknowledge the Nakba. And I was very unhappy to hear our foreign minister, Tzipi Livni, saying the other day that there will not be peace until the Palestinians will write off or delete this phrase Nakba from their lexicon.
Rami, what is the Palestinian narrative? What would you tell an Israeli about the history?
The point we would make is that there was a community of Palestinian Arabs, mostly Muslims, some Christians, have lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and suddenly a community that was 95% Arab over a period of 30, 40 years became 80% Jewish and 20% Palestinian. What happened? That was not a normal transfer of population. That was not an organic process. So that's the trauma that the denial, the dispersal, the disenfranchisement, the exile, the occupation, the dehumanization of a community that had lived with integrity and decency and humanity.
Yeah, Rami, this is, I could say, a result of the war of the 48 war and the refusal of the Arab states to accept the partition plan.
Well, not really. There's an element there. Of course, the Arabs rejected the partition plan. The fighting,
well, Rami, was it
a fair plan? 48,
was the partition plan a fair plan for the Palestinians?
No, of course it wasn't a fair plan. I mean, there was an extraordinary series of pressures brought to bear on individual countries by the U.S. and others to bring it about. But this was a consequence of many years of British colonial control and recent American pressure. But
now today, Professor Ramadan, what did this all mean the last several decades, and what does it mean today? What does Palestine symbol for the Arab and Muslim world?
I think that what was said is really important for the people, and you remind this, which is the fact that for all the Muslim people, the Arab population, Palestine and Palestinians are a symbol of resistance and resistance for the very existence of a state. This is something which is quite clear for all the people. But there is a gap between what the governments are doing and what the people are feeling. So there is something which is huge and tremendous support throughout the Arab world and the Muslim world towards this resistance. Now what we have is governments playing with the states, playing with the European countries, and not really supporting the process.
Karma, then where does the Nakba, the remembrance today, play in raising the consciousness on the question of Palestine?
I think it's so important. You know, we're talking about 60 years since this happened, but it's a very dynamic process. It's continuing. The expulsions, the land expropriations carry on.
Did the destruction of Palestine start the way it meant to continue, with the demolition of Palestinian homes? The following excerpts from Al Jazeera documentaries tell the story.
If you go to the old heart of Jaffa, the Clock Tower Square, you'll see a plaque that marks the liberation of the city in May 1948. But who or what was Jaffa being liberated from? As far as Palestinians are concerned, in May 1948, Jaffa was liberated from its own native people. The British chose a method of occupation that has been employed by the Israelis ever since: the demolition of houses.